Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. My name is Egberto Willis. We're here today with Will Moravits. He's a professor of political science for Alamo Community College and Texas State University for 3 years. He was a police officer for the city of San Marcos, Texas, having graduated top cadet from the Basic Training Academy of the University of Texas at Austin. He holds a Master's of Arts in Political Science from Texas State University and a PhD in Public Policy and Administration from Walden University. He is a native of Uvalde, as we say in Texas. Uvalde, yes, Texas. Welcome to Politics Done Right. William, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know if you're going to want to be on because you're in a dangerous spot, brother. I mean, you're an ex-cop. Well, you're still a cop or not a cop? I know you're a professor.
No, I'm a professor. Yeah, I haven't been a cop for a while, actually.
Yeah,
I was warned that.
No, actually, no. I don't know what you were warned about, but actually, we're pretty cool here. We like everybody here. You know.
Yeah, well, I watched some of your previous videos and saw it, and so I thought it'd be a good time to come on.
Yeah, we're super fair here. Anyway, before we get started, tell me a little bit about yourself. What made you want to become a cop? What was intrinsic to you that said, this is what I want to do?
Well, growing up, I guess I had a little bit of a fascination with superheroes, and you can tell I've passed that on to my sons. Just that helping people, that putting yourself at risk to help others, to just always being there. But I really never thought about being a cop. I was more at times thinking more of the military. Unfortunately, my hearing is in my one ear, and one of my ears has been bad since I was a little child. So the military wouldn't take me. But it was after 9/11 is when I said, okay, policing might be something I want to do just to give back to the community. So it was really that event, which I was 22, just turned 23, I think. So it had a real big impact on me. And that's when I went and did it. Unfortunately, family issues, being a cop isn't very friendly to your marriage oftentimes, as it is with all first responders, firefighters, EMS, because the scheduling and just the things you see and things like that. And my family is, most of them are teachers themselves, my uncle, my mom, my dad, my sister. So I thought, okay, if I want to have time for my sons, after my divorce to be there whenever they needed me, if I had the same schedule they do, it works out pretty well. So that's kind of how I ended up. Yeah, that's how I ended up in teaching.
Now, let me ask you this. What kind of cop were you? And you know what I mean? Were you one of those like tough cops that you wanted to show that, it's me, or were you kind of because let me just tell you, I give cops a hard time because a lot of times it's justified, but I've met very good cops as well. In fact, I've written blogs on cops that have stopped me and given me such an attention that I've written the blog and gotten one of them a commendation because of the blog that I wrote on that particular cop. So for me, it's just about doing the right thing. What kind of cop were you?
Well, I was in my mid-20s, and I just describe it as I wanted to help people, not to make their lives miserable, right? So obviously San Marcos is a college town. So a lot of the stuff we dealt with was college students drinking and doing stupid stuff. And, I was pretty laid back. If you were respectful, I'd give you a warning. I think I ran the numbers on my traffic stops. I think I gave a ticket on like 12% of all stops that I made. I had one college student say, "Man, you're a cool cop. I wish more cops were like you," because for me, and I know a lot of officers out there would not agree with what I'm about to say, but for me, I had a hard time at that age anyways, putting charges on a kid for doing stuff I did in college, and so as long as they were respectful, and like, if the party's really loud, your neighbors are calling, shut it down. No, if I don't have to come back, no ticket. But then of course you had the kids that were like, screw you and all that kind of stuff. And at that point you're like, well, my grace is running thin. But I was always taught by my department, my field trainers to start off always professional, polite and professional with every single person you encounter, and don't change unless they change. Right. And so some people, as one of my old sergeants used to say, just, they don't understand anything but cursing, or like a stern voice. But I always started off, yes, sir. I've been referring to you as yes, sir. That's just how I was raised. Everybody's yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And, even younger people than me. And I tried to be a good cop that didn't just do his job, but that had integrity and made people, kind of look at law enforcement maybe, in a more positive light. Because, when you're a cop, you never get called for anything good, right? Everything you do is because someone's hurt, someone's in need of medical attention, traffic accident, any of those things. And so, it can get kind of jaded for the officer, but for the people you're dealing with, they may end up with a perception of cops are just a bunch of assholes or something like that. And I always try to go out of my way to just be who I am as a person, and let them see me for Will Moravits, not just some white guy in a cop uniform. And when 9/11 happened, I was actually a youth minister at the time, so I never really had that kind of like forceful, edginess to me when I was working.
No, but I am sure, and I'm sure that in hanging with a whole lot of other officers, that you did see that negative behavior, that one that said, I'm a police officer, I'm in charge, this is just how I am. Did you see that?
Yeah, there's a couple people I worked with. I worked night shift my whole career. So, I really only got to know probably about 20 officers well, out of the 87 that worked there at the time. There's a few that they might start off but professional, but they were very easy to get upset, like become the pissed off police officer. And we did have, unfortunately, there's not a lot of cops have trouble with their marriage, not just because of what they see and how it affects them, but especially in a college town like San Marcos, there's a lot of temptation. Those college girls, they love a man in uniform, and I got propositioned many times on traffic stops from college students, and I was faithful to my now ex-wife and never even considered it, but I knew some that did, and there was one officer that I worked with who, I don't know whatever happened to him, but he did get fired and arrested and fired for having some sort of inappropriate contact with a girl on a traffic stop. But by and large, these were fathers and husbands and brothers, and they all seemed to, just about every single one of them I talked to got in it to help people. There was a few that were like, well, it was the best paying job for what I was qualified for, or things like that. Some are like ex-military that it's kind of a natural, just similar culture. Beyond that, I think, there's definitely cop humor, right? There's definitely, and you find this with veterans of wars, or, even firefighters, first responders. They kind of have a dark sense of humor because laughter is how they deal with a lot of the stuff you see. But I would say out of the 87 cops I worked with, and the 20 or so that I knew really well, and I knew a few from other agencies as well, I think they were all good people trying to do their best. Everybody makes mistakes. When cops make a mistake, unfortunately, that can cause injury or even death to themselves or to others. So there's a lot of scrutiny there. But like when I teach my classes, I'm like, okay, everybody makes mistakes. The difference between, let's say, a cop and Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady, whether you love him or hate him, he's probably the greatest quarterback of all time, right? The GOAT. Does he throw interceptions? Did he lose games because of it? Yeah, of course he did. And no one studies harder. No one, he's the most successful player. But when he throws an interception, unless it's the last play of the game or whatever, he gets another chance to make it right. It's not so easy when you're a cop or a firefighter or something like that. That sometimes the mistakes you make, do have bad consequences. It really can't be undone. And that's a lot of pressure. When I was young, I'll be frank with you. I thought officers, weren't all that smart, in general. I mean, and that perception existed at Texas State. A lot of those kids were like being a cop is what happens when you only have a high school diploma. And of course, my sergeant was like a master's degree holder in criminal justice, and was like, no. But what I found going through the academy, UT Austin supposedly has one of the toughest academic academies in the country.
My alma mater.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I looked at your bio, saw that. Physically, it wasn't, SAPD, Texas DPS, those are much more physically demanding, but academically it was a lot. And the information wasn't necessarily hard to grasp, but I was amazed at the amount of information you had to know. And then you also had this part of the job where not everything is clear-cut textbook, right? So you have to, it's called the totality of the circumstances. You have to factor in all these different things. So, for example, using force. I'm 6'1". When I was a cop, I was about 190 pounds. I was an athlete. I was told, look, you're going to have to hold off on use of force longer than the female officer, because people will look at that. You're a decent sized man. You should have been able to avoid escalating, whereas a female officer, 5'6", 120 pounds, can use force and higher levels of force quicker when it comes to those situations. And you have to think about all that. And, when you're first starting out, especially since I didn't live in San Marcos, half the time I was just trying to make sure I knew where I was going when I got called, what street is it, and all that kind of stuff. So there's just a lot to know. And I do think there's a problem in the police community where they don't do enough. And I was just on a podcast called Three Cops Talk a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned this, that the profession in general hasn't done a really great job of trying to communicate with the people that they're sworn to protect and serve. And I think in addition to that, there was, and it's been a while since I've been a cop, but like we were trained to have friends that were not cops. We're told that because if you're only in the cop world, you start to see everything as us versus them, because everybody you deal with is being accused of a crime or doing something wrong, and that's why you're there. So it's really important, to kind of have community ties that have nothing to do with your job. Otherwise, you can get jaded, and it started to happen to me before I left.
And that's where I want to, when you talk about jaded, I want to stop you right there to ask, first of all, well, I wanted to ask something beforehand, but I want to do this first. Why did you write The Blue Divide?
Well, I wrote it because I wanted people to understand how cops are trained, what the law says about use of force, and what the academic data says about use of force, specifically when it comes to deadly force for Black Americans, because you've seen the last 8 years since 2014, Black Lives Matter becoming part of the mainstream. And of course, after George Floyd was murdered, Black Lives Matter had a profound impact, not just here, but in the entire world. And I knew that, obviously there are times when, Chauvin went to prison and he got what was coming to him. They say, there's a saying that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. But some of the other cases, I thought there was some misinformation out there. I thought there was misunderstanding about what cops are allowed to do. I would hear people say things like, well, why don't you shoot him in the knee? President Biden said about Officer Reardon that shot and killed Ma'Khia Bryant, why didn't you shoot her in the hand? And, we're not all Bruce Willis and Die Hard, where we never miss and we can shoot, 1,000 yards away or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of bridge that gap between people who may not have the highest opinion of police and those that support them, and specifically for communities of color, because there's no doubt about it that the history of policing in America, especially in the South, is fraught with racism and injustices.
I want to correct that, because, I think the South get too often a bad rap. I live in the South, and right. I've been stopped in the South and the North and elsewhere. And the truth of the matter is, the way I see it, cops are cops are cops. And when you have good ones, you have good ones. And when you have bad ones, you have bad ones. Now, I'm going to tell you I actually call several of the good ones bad ones, because they allow the good one, they allow the bad ones, they turn their eyes away from all the bad that the bad ones
what
are
they
doing.
call the blue wall.
They're complicit. Okay. Now,
yeah, well, I was referring to the South back, Jim Crow and that era, not necessarily today, the last 20, 30 years.
A lot of things have changed. I was actually kind of sticking up a bit from a Southern cops, because in a lot of ways I'm saying that too often we have this racial thing. We want to make people believe like it is so much worse in the South. Some of my nicest racist friends are here in the South. We love each other. I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, the South of 2022 is not the South of 1954.
Right. But what I'm really trying to get at is this, Will. And I just kind of scanned your book. So I didn't get to see some of the flavor of the book that I'm hoping an interview can get out.
Okay.
Do you not believe that people of color do get a different type of treatment from cops in the aggregate?
Well, some of the studies I cited show that in lower levels of force, yes, that is true. When it comes to deadly force, though, several of the studies I found actually showed either no discrepancy, or in some cases in a simulation type training that Washington State University did, that cops are actually slightly more likely to shoot white people in situations. And when asked about it, these officers told the professors, and you can find the study online that's referenced in my book. They said that they hesitated because they know how it looks, especially when a white cop shoots a black man or a black woman. So I think in the last 8 years, because of Black Lives Matter and because of the attention that the issue has drawn, I think in a lot of cases, cops are a little bit more hesitant to use deadly force because they know that the scrutiny is going to come, even if it's justified. But no, I definitely, the use of force data does show that at lower levels of force, specifically, young black men are going to have more, encounters of that nature than other people.
Let me ask you a question. I do a lot of blogging, and I blogged a video where there was this 14-year-old black kid fighting with a 16-year-old white kid, or 17-year-old white kid. I don't remember which one. The white kid was the aggressor. They're fighting in the mall. 2 cops came. They didn't use deadly force, but they broke the fight up. They put the white guy to sit, and they threw the black guy down on the ground, sat down on him, put handcuffs on him. I see videos in school, and we see videos of white kids getting arrested too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to
right
at all. But what I find difficult, and even let's say with yourself, I just find it hard for everyone not to see that there is a distinct difference in policing. Let me point out something that you mentioned there that's apropos. You said that they did a study at this university with the cops, and when they did this experiment, the cops drew their guns quicker on the white person than the black person. Let me tell you another study that I've done myself. I've done the study that says, who do you think is the criminal? And because I'm a smart dude and you're a smart dude, we both are Longhorns, brother. One of the things I did for that test is I made sure to make it that I was in control of what was being tested. In other words, it was a test. We knew what the outcome was likely or wanted to be. and the test isn't really valid. And in other words, a lot of these control studies that they want to make control studies are not appropriate. What you have to do is look at the empirical data out there, because that is what's happened without you knowing that you're being tested for something. Do you follow what I'm saying there?
No, I understand. Yeah. And that was actually the only data or empirical study that I used where that was simulated. Everything else was looking at, CDC death reports, FBI uniform crime report, some government statistics, national crime victims survey.
Let me interrupt you one more time. Yes. Sorry for that. You notice I don't interrupt a lot. I like my audience, my guests, because you are my guest. You're welcome here. One of the things that puzzled me as well is when you say that, if you take a look at the FBI statistics, right? I always laugh at that, right? Because I live in Kingwood, Texas. I live in a lily white neighborhood, okay? And in my daughter went to school, and I never showed up my activism then because I didn't want her to have to deal with the effects of that. But in my community, when those kids go to the park behind my house and they get caught with beer bus and all these things, including one guy who wrecked his father's Mercedes, and the cop told him, hold on, when the person was trying to press charges, hold on a minute, and they went and do other things. I see that these guys at the point of entry to the data that you read, in other words, the point of entry to that FBI data, is not the same if it were in my wife's community, which is a predominantly Black community on the other side of Houston, right? Something happens there, they are into the system, their numbers are in. So if you then look at the FBI data that's in there, it says, whoa, the crime rate among young Black men so much higher than white young men. And in my community, the white young people are heavy on drugs because they can afford it. These guys, so what I'm saying is, when I see these reports just in the raw, I want people to take it with a grain of salt. In fact, I would love for you to take it with a grain of salt when you're looking at those reports as well, to be able to say, well, that is something to think about, because I know the thing that I fear the most. I'm a professional. I'm an engineer. I'm a business owner. I have all these things. I have my own house, my own business. And when I see a cop, my heart's right here in my throat. And I'm a grown man. Yeah. That's not accidental, Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to
that's what we're having a conversation.
What you're saying, but when I get pulled over today, I get pretty darn nervous.
Well, you should, because you wrote The Blue Divide.
Yeah. But there's a little bit difference. I totally understand where you're going with the crime reports. There's a difference between, the book is not about drinking, lower levels of force, drugs, or anything like that. It's about deadly force. And so when you look at the FBI uniform crime reports, the chances that a department is not going to report that they had to kill somebody is extremely low. All right. We know this because...
Hold on. I got to challenge you there. And let me tell you why I'm challenging you there.
Okay.
When we had, what's the name of when Chauvin killed the man, that report didn't say he killed the man on the neck. That report said, and this is why I said BS in, BS out. That report said he died of accident or some sort of natural causes or something like that. If that young girl didn't have the video on so that other people would have seen it, that would have been classified in the FBI data not as a murder, not as killing by force, but something else.
Well, usually what they do is they refer to it as homicide, which does not necessarily include murder. It's
true. You're right. Yeah.
But you see, when you take the CDC, for example, their reports, when you compare them side by side with the FBI crime reports on deadly force, they're very similar. The National Crime Victim Survey has nothing to do with police, right? It's just surveying victims of crime, and they ask things like, okay, do you know the race of the offender? Did you know their gender? You know, those kinds of things. And the data is not exact, but it matches up fairly well with deadly force. I don't doubt that some departments are not going to. Sorry, sounds like we're getting hail outside of my house right now.
Oh, is that hail out there in New Brunswick?
Yeah, we were supposed to have a really big storm coming through.
My wife told me that. Yeah.
But so my poor truck, I don't have a garage, so my poor truck's probably going to have to go to the shop.
No problem.
So
you're doing it even in a storm. We're having this conversation even during a storm.
Yeah, but I do think that you're correct in the sense that lower levels of crime don't often get reported, especially if you don't actually charge them, right? So like technically, minor in possession of alcohol, right? That's a crime. But you may say, all right, just dump out the beer and go home, right? And so that wouldn't go into the report.
Right.
And I've done that before where I gave these guys a break. They had some very small amounts of marijuana on them. And I'm like, they obviously weren't high while they were driving. They just had it. And I'm like, look, let's go on camera. Let's dump out the marijuana on the street and rub it with our feet, and then you just go on your way with a traffic violation, which is what pulled them over in the first place with. Departments, I work for a good department. Every time we used any force or a threat of force, we had to report it. The leadership at my department was very good about training. That's not the case for every department, especially smaller departments. They don't have the budget. They don't have the thing. And another thing that we see is when you hire cops who have a bachelor's degree or higher, they tend to have fewer use of force complaints. They tend to have fewer complaints in general, because the thought is going to college, you don't, I guess you're more enlightened is probably the best way to put it. So yeah, I definitely agree that on non-lethal crime, that the numbers could be skewed because cops aren't necessarily going to charge this person while they may charge that person. But I also think that a lot of cops are understanding of the tension. When I was a cop, I started in 2004. I'll never forget, I pulled over this car at like 3 a.m. So it's very dark outside. It wasn't a well-lit area. It's a residential place, and the guy ran a stop sign. So I pull him over, and it's a college student. He's a young black man, and said, hey, this is why I stopped you, and license and insurance and all that. And he was very respectful. And when I came back up, he said, sir, can I ask you a question? And I was like, yeah. He's like, did you pull me over because I'm black? And I was shocked at that. I was like, oh crap, this is, I knew this was going to happen eventually, right? It was going to be that. And I was like, well, sir, I was like, it's 3 o'clock. I didn't know who was behind the wheel of the car because I can't see into your car. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. And everything was fine. And I just use that example as I was aware of how my actions towards people of color would be perceived. Not just because I'm white, but also because I'm a cop, right? So I think more understanding from police in that context would be beneficial, is why I said, when I did that podcast, Three Cops Talk, they even said, we haven't, as a profession, done a good enough job. And in San Antonio, there's stories where the neighborhood cop comes by and plays basketball with the kids in the street and stuff like that, where it's a white cop and black kids or Mexican American kids or other Hispanic groups. And I think that needs to be put out there more, to realize that there are people behind the badge. Sometimes they do bad things. Most of the time, they're just trying to do their job and get home to their family. But I think we definitely need to punish those cops who abuse their authority, whether that be in a sense of, Derek Chauvin. The other 3 officers were found guilty of violating Floyd's civil rights just last month, actually about 3 weeks ago. They're going to spend life in prison.
I am with you there, but it has to start somewhere, and I also think it has to start with with a little bit of reflection, and that is that I think cops, and by the way, this is not only white cops. I really mean it, because there's something about cops when even black cops, I mean, there are certain black cops in a black neighborhood that'll treat those kids worse than some white cops in that neighborhood. So understand what I'm saying. My thing is always to find solutions to issues. And there is, in fact, a problem with cops and the minority community. And I think folks have to, as opposed to looking at, let's say, the FBI numbers and all those kind of things, right? Which, yes, that has to be a part of the discussion. I think you have to also look at what people perceive and feel, which is something that I think you just said, that that one of the problems with the police officers is they don't communicate things. But I also think we have to be honest to realize certain things, right? Cops in general, and you tell me, and I think we want to be honest. Because of what we put out there, because of the narrative, cops are generally more fearful of Black men. Don't you agree with that?
Well, I can't speak for others.
Not
in the
you.
aggregate.
Let me
aggregate, possibly, yeah.
You started out telling me you were in the ministry and all that, so you kind of have an idea of how to talk to people. But a lot of these, you're from Uvalde. Come on, there are a lot of these folks in these different towns in Texas or anywhere, these little towns, that they're fearful, and more so of somebody who would look like me. And I just wish cops would just come out and say, man, I've had some of them tell me, by the way, I have relatives that are cops, as well, and come out and say, yeah, that's the narrative, their first instinct, it's like that thing that I showed where they attacked the Black kid, threw the Black kid on the floor. I think we have to admit that bias is ingrained, and I'm not trying to make it a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying it's just a thing.
Yeah, well,
and knowing a thing we can work on.
I would agree with that. I mean, not having seen the video you're referencing to, but I've seen other similar ones. One in McKinney, Texas, from a few years ago, where there's like a big pool party in one of those neighborhoods. I think that, let's back up a little bit there. One of the first part of my book is about the training, because my goal in writing this is to make things better between Black America and policing. And, I think what happens, to your point, is the perception, especially with appearance, or maybe the way someone talks. I'll be honest. I pulled over a Black man in a BMW with a suit and tie. I didn't once for a second think he was ever going to be a threat. Right. I've pulled over white guys with wife beater shirts, the jeans, the heavy boots, and that chain link with the thing, and maybe some tattoos. And I think this might be, a bad dude. Right. So I think that honestly, I think is part of it. And unfortunately, to your point, the narrative around young Black men often is that, because your pants are down around your butt, or, you're wearing, a bandana around your neck, or whatever the case may be, that somehow you're automatically, kind of a bad dude. And I think that's unfair. You got to treat people. And my department was good about treat people how you want to be treated. Don't change that unless they're resisting somehow. Don't get stern with them. If they're compliant, just treat them like you would your neighbor. I think more of that needs to happen. But I also want people to understand what the law and the training actually says, because you see this a lot with, the police shot him and he was unarmed. Sometimes that can be an unjustified police shoot. Sometimes it can be justified. I write about this in my book. After I left law enforcement, I spent 4 years training mixed martial arts pretty heavily. And the first day I went in there, I boxed a guy who had been boxing since he was a kid. I could not lay a finger on him, and he was just playing with me the whole time, and after about 18 months, 2 years or so, I remember a guy from the Marine Corps came in, and I made him tap out because he couldn't touch me, and I was just punching him not really hard, but I just kept peppering him with jabs and stuff because he didn't know how to fight. And I started to think about that. I was like, you take your average high school wrestler, male wrestler. I would say out of an average high school male wrestler, 90% of them, and I'm just guessing, but 90% of them could probably tackle a cop and take their gun, because cops are not trained in that, usually are not trained. The ones that are have an advantage. And I feel that's another way that we could really address some of this problem, because if you are in a fight with somebody and you know your ability and you know that you can survive on your back and you can get up after someone tackles you, stuff like that, you're much less likely to resort to weapons, right? Because and the officers that were doing MMA when I was a cop, before I started doing it, they rarely used any kind of intermediate weapons. They were able to use wrestling or jujitsu or stuff to gain control without harming them, the subject. And cops, I think it would be better for them, but they also have to realize that there's no background check to go to an MMA class, and so there's some not so honest people that work out there, and they know how to fight really well, and maybe they don't, have any qualms about going after a cop or trying to hurt them or what have you. But I think that's something that I wanted people to understand, is all the different nuances that goes into when you make a use of force decision.
I want to say something before, because we're coming close to the end of the interview. And by the way, folks, I want you to get the book, because let me tell you why I want folks to get the book, because there are certain little snippets in the book that I'd like folks to write to you about. Send Will Moravits an email and say, Will, let's explain this a little bit more here. But I think it's important, because your point of view, in as much as you want to do good, I know that you're a good person. I think there are some other points that need to be exposed here. Like let's talk about cops using force and deadly force. I think the laws are written all wrong. And why are the laws written all wrong? Because there are too many dead people. And I'm not only talking this on a color barrier at all. I'm talking about there is so much protection for the cop in when he shoots. And well, even though the person did absolutely nothing wrong, because I had the feeling that he may or she may hurt me, I have the right to blow your head off. There are a lot of these laws that need to be rethought, right?
Well, and I've often told people, you may disagree with what the law says, you may disagree with how the training works, but I just want to explain what it is, because people generally don't know what the rules are.
And that's good.
And so if you want to have a discussion that we need to change some of the laws surrounding use of force, then we can have that discussion. I will say that if you go too far the other direction, people aren't going to want to be cops anymore.
Well,
so you got to have a balance there.
I hear you. But the thing about it is, most cops don't ever discharge their weapon. Most cops,
right?
Never, most cops are. Most cops really are good. I don't normally say that, but most cops really are good. My family, I have a lot of family that are cops. They're really good, but too often, and one of them told me, he said, after I am retired, I'll tell you some stories. And my thing to my cousin was, my God, so you actually saw some stuff and didn't say anything? He said, I had a family to feed. You get the point.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot that needs changing, and I think somebody like you coming out and writing a book about it and putting it out there, I think it's a good thing. So folks, get the book, The Blue Divide: Policing and Race in America, by Dr. Will Moravits, former cop, now a professor at at Texas State University, etc. Get the book, but I want to finish here this way. Well, I'm going to give you the same honor I give everybody else. What would you have liked me to ask you? And please do it in a minute. What would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't?
Oh gosh.
If nothing, it's fine too.
Nothing really pops out to me. I think, maybe asking about one of the cases that I discuss in the book, is like the middle of the book is where I go through Eric Garner, through, I think Ma'Khia Bryant was the most.
I saw them in the.
And just looked at some of those high profile. And again, if you read those chapters, you know that I don't shy away from criticizing the police when I think it was warranted. And I think that's something that's starting to happen, that more people are realizing that they need to stop this blue wall of silence. My department, like I said, was very good about that. When you stepped out of line, someone was there to pull you back. But in other cases, I just think that you can disagree with the law, but based on the law, that particular shooting was justified. Right. That's what I wanted people to understand.
And because I don't know if I didn't see this in your book, whether you said at any point that it is the law, but it's probably a law that needs to be changed.
I didn't really address that. No.
Right. Okay. So what I'm saying is I hope people would read and see when you say, well, the law says this is legal, and we can say, well, you know what, that type of law puts my life in jeopardy whenever I'm in front of a cop. And let me tell you, when I'm in front of a cop, I'm the most civil person. My hands are on. You see me stop. You should look for the article that I wrote about that cop who kind of smirked at me because I was so, and it's the one that got the commendation because of the blog I wrote.
Yeah.
I'm always proper with these cops.
We'll
right?
see. Yeah, I carry a gun. I have license to carry, and I have it when I drive. There's a magnet right underneath my steering column. Mm-hmm. That's where I have it. So when I get pulled over, I'm like, my hands are all the way on the dash. And first thing I say is, I have a license to carry. The gun's right here. Can you please remove it? Or can I please get out of the car?
There you go. Hey, look, Will, I gotta go. This has been Will Moravits, is a professor of political science for Alamo Community Colleges and Texas State University. Look, it's been my honor to have you as a police officer, as a professor, as a PhD to speak to. I hope people will get your book and send you their comments about it, about what they feel. So thank you so kindly for having been on.
Well, I appreciate it very much. I enjoyed it too.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.